Central and eastern England, where those showers will be heavy at times. It's going to feel cool here as well, 12 or 13 Celsius on that North Sea coast, but where we've got mostly dry weather towards the southwest, 17 or 18 Celsius, not feeling too chilly. Into Wednesday morning, again, a cool start to the day. Plenty of bright weather first thing. A few more showers develop across eastern England. Elsewhere, it stays mostly dry as a ridge of high pressure builds in. That leads to a settled end to the day on Wednesday, but it's only ahead of the next batch of rain moving in for Thursday and Friday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our summer spectacular. 3 top prizes that have to be won. There's cash. £15,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this summer. Plus a brand new iPhone 15 with a set of Apple AirPods. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also treat you to some fun in the sun with £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction this summer. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening. I'm Tom Harwood, Deputy Political Editor of GB News, bringing you the State of the Nation's 2024 election coverage. Tonight. Is Europe turning right while Britain goes left? Certainly looks that way from the results of yesterday's EU elections, which saw major hard-right gains across the continent. And speaking of the European Union, the Liberal Democrats have issued their manifesto today, but you might have missed the small print that declared an intention to rejoin the European Union. And the Labour Party private school tax saga drags on as an old video emerges showing Angela Rayner calling for the complete and total abolition of independent schools as recently as 2018. Plus, have the Tories failed to tackle debanking? Remember that? Well, as Parliament was dissolved 2 weeks ago, so was the legislation designed to stop the practice. Founder of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, joins me live in the studio to discuss his new petition. State of the Nation starts now. And through it all, I'll be joined by my panel, the former Brexit Party turned Conservative MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. That's all coming up after your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Tom, thank you. Good evening. Well, our top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that two little boys have become the youngest convicted murderers in Britain since the killing of 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. The 12-year-olds were found guilty of murdering a man with a machete in a Wolverhampton park last year. They stabbed 19-year-old Sean Cesarhai in November in an unprovoked attack. The jury's decision to convict the boys was unanimous. His parents have said they'll never recover from the loss of their son. In politics, the Prime Minister says he never considered quitting despite heavy criticism over his early departure from D-Day commemorations in Normandy. It comes after the Prime Minister kept a low profile over the weekend, avoiding questions from reporters as rumours circulated that he may step down. He's now vowing to not stop fighting for the future of our country. Labour today has promised to deliver free breakfast clubs in schools, part of a new childcare plan they say will save parents over £400 a year. They're also claiming it'll cut almost 500,000 days of school absences. For parents who already pay for before-school childcare, Labour says funded breakfast clubs could cut the cost by up to £50 a week. The Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, has launched his party's manifesto with a pitch to voters based on boosting the NHS and social care. Sir Ed also said that unlike those of Labour and the Tories, the Liberal Democrats' plans are fully costed, adding that more and more people are coming over to their cause. Reform UK has set out its economic policy for the election campaign. Their plans include raising the personal tax threshold to £20,000, abolishing IR35 for sole traders and raising the VAT threshold for small businesses to around £150,000. And moving to politics in France now, where Emmanuel Macron, the president, says his country needs a clear majority now in government for serenity and harmony, he said, after the shock decision to call a snap election. He made the announcement following a defeat of his party to the right-wing National Rally Party in European polls, which has also resulted in Belgium's Prime Minister saying he'll resign. In the election, the National Rally won more than double the votes of Macron's centrist alliance, right-wing parties making gains in Italy, Austria and Germany as well. And lastly, pro-Palestine activists have targeted 20 branches of Barclays Bank across England and Scotland today. Palestine Action and Shut the System, both pressure groups, sprayed red paint through rocks and smashed windows at locations including London, Bristol and Edinburgh. They say they're demanding the company divests itself from Israel's weapons trade and fossil fuels. Barclays says it recognises the profound human suffering caused by the conflict in Gaza. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on the screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Polly. Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm Tom Harwood. Now the EU election results are in and the verdict is clear. A surge in support for the more hardline Conservative parties in the European Parliament. The hard-right German party, Alternative for Deutschland, is projected to earn 16% of the vote, which is more than any of the other parties' share in the government's coalition. These results came in spite of repeated scandals. Meanwhile, Marine Le Pen's party in France, National Rally, is projected to win almost a third of the votes, more than doubling Emmanuel Macron's party, prompting him to call a snap parliamentary election in France. So along with right-wing leaders like Viktor Orban in Hungary or Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Geert Wilders, a man who was once blocked from entering the UK, now holds the keys to power in the Netherlands. In the two most powerful EU countries too, France and Germany, both National Rally and Alternative for Deutschland are set to gain ground at the next national elections too. This is also not just the case in European politics. The now convicted felon, Donald Trump, is set to win the US presidential election if the polls are borne out to be true. He continues to lead across national polls. Yet, what a contrast can be seen in British politics. If you take a look at the 6 leaders who appeared on the stage at last week's BBC debate, the political compass was quite revealing. Of the 6, 4 were on the left in one form or another. One, being Penny Mordaunt, was a moderate Conservative, and Nigel Farage, well, he's probably the only one who could reasonably be described as being on the traditional right wing. In terms of Reform's recent rise in the polls, the most generous projections have the party gaining only 2 seats. So what does all this mean, taken together? With Labour's persistent lead in the polls, with some suggesting the party will win perhaps a 200-seat majority, the United Kingdom is set to turn sharply to the left, just as the rest of the Western world is turning right. So at this moment in time, please spare a thought for our friends in the Scottish Nationalist Party, whose pitch for partition of the UK is almost entirely predicated on jumping from being governed by elected politicians in these isles to being governed from the continent. Yes, the left-wing Scottish Nationalist Party are now pitching to jump from the soggy left-wing Starmer government into the arms of what could reasonably be described as an increasingly hard-right EU. Whoops. Well, let's get the detail now. Let's discuss and analyse what has actually happened on the continent in the last day or so. Delighted to be joined by Guy Dampier, Senior Researcher at the Legatum Institute. Guy, thank you for making the time for us this evening. Let's start with the 2 perhaps biggest upsets. What happened with Marine Le Pen in France and the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany.
Thank you for having me, Tom. So in Germany, the coalition government that is currently ruling things has done an appalling time of things. But I think although the Alternative Deutschland has done extremely well, we should temper that by noting that the Christian Democratic Union, which is the centre-right party, has done equally very well. And in fact, if the AfD leads anywhere, it's interestingly among youth voters, which again is very different to Britain. In France, on the other hand, it's a somewhat different picture. The Front National, the Rassemblement National, have done extremely well, getting double the number of seats as double the number of votes as Macron's party. But again, in order to do that, Marine Le Pen has been on a long journey away from the party of her father to the point of even expelling him.
Changed the name of the party, as you just demonstrated.
Yes, exactly. They've changed the name of the party. And she's also taken a strong PR move, and she's put a young fellow called Jordan Bardella, who's only 28, as the almost face of the party. And with the announcement that from Macron that they're going to hold parliamentary elections, she's even said that if they win, it won't be her as Prime Minister, it's going to be Mr. Bardella.
No, it's extraordinary that that Macron made this move. Why do you think it is that the French president has decided to almost jump the gun and call these elections? Is he trying to sort of get ahead of this rise in the polls for the right wing?
I think that's exactly it, Tom. He's had a very difficult time of it, and I think what he thinks is that if he gives Marine Le Pen enough rope, she will essentially hang herself. So with all the energy that she's got, she now has to go into a new campaign. She's going to have very low funds, and she's going to have difficulty getting more funds, which is going to make it harder in the campaign. Should they do well, then they'll face a Macron being president for several more years, which will blunt anything that they want to do. And he might reasonably hope that come the next election, people will think that actually Le Pen has failed to deliver. And of course, if people have been voting this way as a protest vote, then Macron might hope that he'll actually just win the election itself.
And yet, Guy, these parties don't need to do as well as to enter government in terms of to change the conversation in Europe. Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, has started talking about deporting refugees. Macron is boasting about his burqa bans. And in Germany, you've also seen the CDU, the sort of more centre-right Merkel's party, take more and more positions that are hostile to immigration as a result of the AfD rising in the polls. To some extent, this shift to the right doesn't need to win outright. It's completely changing the conversation in Europe.
I think that's right. And as you said earlier, the European Union is not democratic. Even winning in the EU Parliament doesn't actually guarantee you power. But what it does do is it enables you to influence your own national politics. And that's what we can see. These votes are clear signs that voters are dissatisfied with their current governments and dissatisfied with the policies they have. And they will continue to push people to the right, albeit that there will be limitations on how far that can go. I'll be very curious to see how far the supposed deportations the Germans want to do to Afghanistan actually go, seeing as that would likely involve some form of recognition of the Taliban government, which is probably still too far at this point.
No, very interesting stuff. Well, Guy Dampier, thank you so much for joining us, senior researcher at the Legatum Institute, of course. I'm delighted to now be joined by the UK chairman of the Federalist European Movement, Mike Glassworthy. And Mike, thank you for making the time for us. I'm slightly curious about the direction that the EU is going in. Sorry, what was that, Mike?
My name is Mike Goldsworthy. Nice to meet you, Tom.
Nice to meet you. I'm slightly curious at the direction that the EU is going in, because it's often painted as a sort of bastion of liberalism, particularly by the Brits. But that doesn't seem to be the direction that the sort of organs of this organisation are moving in.
It's currently in the European Parliament centre-right, and it stayed centre-right. And in fact, out of the main groupings, the centre-right, the European People's Party, has had more growth than the far right, which are allocated into groupings. But then you've got the AfD and you've got some other exotic parties like...
And they sit as independents.
Fiesta, who are all sort of non-grouped yet and milling around. But still, it's clear from this that the right have done well, and the left, and the Greens in particular, have done badly this time round. But still, you know, you've got the same thing as what you had last time, which the European People's Party, the centre-right, main chunk. Then the next biggest chunk is SND, which is your lefties, your soft centre lefties. And then in third position, you've got Renew, which is effectively your Liberal Democrats. And then after which, you've got your harder rights. And then after that, you've got your Greens. So actually not too dissimilar to what we often see in UK politics. But in the UK, it looks like it's going to turn around, as you were just noting before.
Yes, plus ça change, one might say, about the direction of the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen will be the singular name on the ballot papers of European parliamentarians as they confirm the next European Commission president when the session starts. But I wonder, do these right-wing parties actually need to gain a majority in these institutions to influence these institutions? We've heard von der Leyen talking about third country deportation schemes. We've heard the EU become much more restrictionist when it comes to issues like migration. Clearly, this is a bloc that is moving in a particular direction.
Yeah, no, immigration is an issue. And also in the light of climate change, a lot of people are thinking that immigration is going to become a bigger issue. And one of the things that the European Union is doing is actually starting to say, shall we put together a common framework on this? Because we have shared interests on this matter. I mean, in the UK, we've cut ourselves out from that, and we've got all these problems with the boats and lack of agreements in terms of sending people back. But
nowhere near as many illegal refugees arriving in the UK compared to European countries. We're much, much lower.
Oh, yeah, because we've got much less exposed border. And so this is why it is critical for for Europe as a whole, but, you know, it starts in the EU as most sort of getting ahead movements do, to actually come together and put together a plan on it. So I think that is one of the influences that tends to drive the right a bit. But also, when you've got 27 nations, you know, you see a lot of froth, you see a lot of noise, you see a lot of bubbling. Some of the Scandinavian countries have gone a lot more left. We saw recently in Poland, the right-wing dominant government there just collapsed. And then you've got Donald Tusk back in.
Well, he's a centre-right guy. He made pitches on migration and actually particularly on Islam as well in order to get into power.
He used to be the president of EPP. I only found that out recently while having a look, which surprised me because I thought he was quite a socialist when he was younger. But anyway, so there it is.
Martin Schulz, I think, was a communist, if I remember correctly.
There's a lot of noise, and a lot of people are interested in a lot of the noise. But at the end of the day, the sort of centre-right, the big block of centre-right is kind of holding and dominant. but then also kind of working with SND and Reform. So the collaborative politics will go on.
Yeah, and yet it does seem to be taking more of a restrictionist turn. But Mike Galsworthy, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us, UK Chair of the European Movement. Now, coming up, Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader, has been making headlines for his wacky hijinks, of course. He's been on that enormous slide. Today, he was on a big swing-type thing at Thorpe Park. But he launched his manifesto and, in the fine print, he vowed not only to rejoin the single market, but something deeper as well. Is Brexit in danger of being overturned? Find out after the break.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
What about the elections? Because it seems that the King and everything is moving because of it, and we've got a lot of royal engagements and things that happen at this time.
Yes, well, you know, it means that he has to take more time and be at home. He can't go to all the things he wants to do. He's been doing 5 a day, which is probably made Camilla a bit cross. But what they still hope is that they can get the Japanese Emperor and Empress over. That's in July. That they can go to France for the 80th anniversary of the fighting. And he will be able to do 1 or 2 things, and Ascot he's very keen to do. Now, those aren't things that are political in any way. I just want to talk about Harry and Charles's argument, where Harry said he didn't want to stay, he wanted to go to a hotel. And it's come out now that actually King Charles is believed that he was offered St James's, and Princess Anne stays there and Beatrice stays there.
And this was for when Harry came over for his 10th anniversary.
Exactly. And the policemen are wandering around with guns, and there's no chance of actually there being any problem there. So the fact that he said that it wasn't safe for him was not actually a very sensible thing to say, I don't think.
Well, he went to Nigeria, and that is, in the world ranking, it's ranked as quite a dangerous place.
Yes, one of the dangerous places in the world. But now Harry and Meghan have been invited to go to Ghana.
Oh, God. Well, it's interesting because my parents are from Ghana. I have Ghanaian heritage, and I'm thinking she'll probably then claim there's a percentage that she's Ghanaian as well. I'll be like, hang on a minute, you were Maltese, you're also Nigerian,
and
now
German,
you're going to say you're Ghanaian and German.
Yeah.
Come on. Thank you very much.
Squeeze it in.
Yeah, let's get them all in. Angela Levin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. GB News, Britain's election channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 19 minutes past 8. My name's Tom Harwood, and this is State of the Nation. Now, we've been discussing the results of the European Union elections, which resulted in a swell of support for more hardline Conservative parties in the bloc. But today, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, announced the party's election manifesto, which included a whole host of plans, including higher taxes on capital gains and an £8 billion package for the NHS. But what the leader perhaps didn't mention in his speech was the fact that the manifesto includes the party's ambition on something rather controversial: to rejoin the European Union. Well, with me now is Mark Oaten, the former MP and former chairman of the Liberal Democrats. Mark, thank you for making the time for us this evening. Why did Ed Davey not mention that the plan is to rejoin the European Union in his speech when it says so in the manifesto?
Good evening, Tom. Yes, I think it is surprising that he wasn't perhaps bolder in the press conference, but there is such nervousness in the party about talking about this issue. As you just said in your introduction, it's controversial. The party knows that. And in 70 seats where they are desperately trying to get some soft Conservatives coming over to them, they will be nervous about raising this issue. That said, it is in there. It is in the manifesto. Ed has said that a starting point will be to join the single market and then over time to move towards rejoining Europe. But I would personally like them to be more upfront about this. I think actually there's an appetite for hearing from a political party that is honest about its European ambitions.
Yeah, it does seem... I'm glad you used the word honest, because it does seem you're almost trying to have different messages to different people, hyper-targeted messaging, because, of course, there are lots of seats that the Liberal Democrats are trying to win that voted Remain and perhaps more leafy parts of outer London. But there are also areas, for example, the southwest, that has been traditionally deeply Eurosceptic, sceptical of the common agricultural policy and many of the anti-farming measures of the European Union. This is potentially talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Well, I think what I'm hearing when I chat on doorsteps at the moment is the...
Oh, Mark, I'm afraid we're having some issues with your line. We're going to see if we can re-establish that, but you are breaking up rather. So we'll go for the moment to my panel. Big apologies, Mark Oaten. We'll try and re-establish your connection. But joining me in the studio now is, well, Let's talk about something slightly else, because in other news, Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry might have caused a bit of a stir, speaking to Camilla Tominey on GB News yesterday.
You know, and if we have to, in the short term, have larger classes, we have larger classes. You know,
so you will make classes larger to accommodate
larger class sizes. Crikey. Well, this morning, the leader of the Labour Party seemed to undermine these remarks.
We've had the analysis by the IFS on this, which says that there'll be a negligible impact. So we're very confident about that.
And just as they were trying to steady the ship, a video emerged of Angela Rayner speaking in 2018, alongside Rachel Reeves, in which she appeared to call for the abolition of private schools altogether.
We are not all the same, and we should be celebrated for the people we are. We will end the marketisation and privatisation of our education.
Well, interesting proposals. Let's try and discuss them now. I'm joined by my panel, former Brexit Party MEP turned Conservative Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Annunziata, the Labour Party seems to be getting into a bit of a bind over education policy. Not that it will affect the general election, but it might affect the governance of the country.
I don't know that they've got any idea what they're doing. Keir Starmer, you just saw quoting the IFS, who happened to have also said that by getting rid of private schools, which was, after all, what they were saying in that clip you just showed, would cost $4 billion in tax receipts and $3 billion with extra pupils going to state schools and causing these larger classes that Emily Thornberry wasn't meant to admit to. We all know it's clearly going to be true. If private schools go bust, if parents can't afford the fees, they can't send their children there, they're going to send them to state schools, and it will be swallowed up with extra pupils.
Amy Nicole-Turner, is this class war? Do you like the pun?
Well, I think the messaging on this is getting really confused, and I don't think Emily Thornberry really helped things. I'm not sure it's like my favourite policy. I think it's a very blunt instrument, but I think that also what's being reported on it is a bit inaccurate. So when you talk about those 40,000 kids that are going to have to be pushed into the state system, well, I think that over the past 10 years or so, fees have gone up by 20% and then some, and no children have really left the private system. And now we see that the energy prices and other things, costs are coming down, then schools will probably and likely be able to absorb those costs elsewhere, and actually the fees won't go up. People have estimated they'll go up around 10% as opposed to 20%, because it's up to the schools. They're a business. They want to keep their customers, and the VAT can be offset elsewhere. There are pros and cons to VAT. So the schools will save money and make money off of this, if you know what I mean.
I don't think many companies say that there are pros to paying VAT.
But you
It
can
is a
offset other
tax.
expenses, right?
It does cost them money. And if you put up the costs further, we have had a high inflation period that have already put up the fees substantially. But if you put them up yet further, there are going to be a lot of parents who cannot afford to send their children to private school. The schools that are going to be affected are not the Eatons and the Harrows and the Winchesters. They are the ones in local areas, smaller schools that have a particular need. They will not be able to survive, and they will be pushing their pupils
However,
into
the
the
stories
state
that we
system.
have seen, such as the school, like was it Downsend School or something recently in the Telegraph, all that, it's kind of a nonsense to say that that school closed because of policy that hasn't actually happened and isn't even necessarily going to happen.
Everyone's budget's ahead. Parents are already getting nervous.
The environment that's been put in by a Tory government with soaring costs.
Already from Emily Thornberry. Class sizes will get larger. There will be a greater burden. She has admitted it. She might not have been meant to, but she's actually telling the truth.
But Annunziata, isn't the point here, the political point, that this is a popular tax to raise? Only 7% of children go to private schools, and the 93% of families might go, well, do you know what, Yabu sucks.
Oh, well, they will then suffer the larger class sizes for all of their children. That it's a very short-sighted policy. It's a class warfare policy.
It's
idealistic, not pragmatic.
To criticise it as much as you are is incredibly short-sighted, because the one thing that will improve growth, social mobility, is a good education for all our children, and that will save the economy in the long run.
So we should bring back assisted places so that state school children can go fully paid for by the taxpayer to private schools that do have better facilities, lower higher teacher to pupil ratios. That we should be giving children those opportunities, not making sure no one has them.
Surely everyone should have access to a good state education. And I hate this argument that it's about special needs
socialism.
schools. And one of the interesting things in the Lib Dem manifesto was they want to put emphasis on improving special needs state education, because surely you shouldn't have to pay through the nose, not go on holidays, have this terrible eating baked beans life to send your kid to a decent education.
Amy, thank you
That
so
should be
much for
everyone.
raising the Lib Dem manifesto, because you've set me up so beautifully to return to Mark Oaten, the former Lib Dem MP, former chairman of the Liberal Democrats as well. Mark, apologies that the line broke up, but you were mid-flow talking about... Yes, of course. Were we in Romania, I'm sure the internet connection would be a lot better. But Mark, let's get down to the nitty-gritty here, because it does seem like the Lib Dems are talking out of one side of the mouth to one set of electors and the other to another.
I think that may have been a true comment 5 years ago when Brexit was so toxic, but actually these days it's not as toxic. I find that people that used to support Brexit actually are now seeing it hasn't delivered what they wanted. And particularly in those rural areas, a lot of the farmers actually feel that they've lost out as a result of Brexit. And those that still
Perhaps not as much as the Dutch farmers feel they've lost out, or the German farmers, or the French farmers.
Tom, those that do feel strongly about Brexit, I actually find this time round are going to be voting reform. So actually there is fairly safe territory, in my judgment, for the Lib Dems to talk about this in a measured way, saying, look, we're going to be honest with you, we're a pro-European party. We start off coming back into the single market, but long term, if the rest of Europe would have us, this is an ambition we would like to go
Just very quickly, Mark, on the issue of the single market, of course, it used to be argued against by the Liberal Democrats on the basis that this is taking all the rules from a body that you send no representatives to. It's regulation without representation.
And back then it was, because we wanted, if you like, the full Monty. But given that we can't get the full Monty at this stage, let's go half in, because half in now is a lot better than what we've currently got.
Wasn't that once described as cherry picking?
Well, it's realistic. It's realpolitik. At the moment, we're not getting any of the benefits. Let's at least get some of them. Long term, I would like to be full in and part back again where we should be, at the heart of Europe.
Well, Mark Oaten, thank you very much for rejoining us. I'm glad we could get that connection re-established. Now, after the break, we'll be discussing a GB News exclusive. You won't believe what Home Office officials have said about the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage. Plus, can you guess what % of young people are simply not interested in voting?
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Still some showers around during the next 24 hours, but also a few clear spells and under starry skies. Tonight, temperatures will fall. It's going to be a chilly one for June. We've got this northerly airflow, and within those northerly winds, we've still got some showers, especially for the north and the east coast. 1 or 2 inland elsewhere, but many of the inland showers will ease overnight, leading to plenty of clear spells, especially in the south and the west, where we've got clear spells, temperatures dipping to 7 or 8 Celsius generally, but a little lower than that in some sheltered spots, and as a result, the potential for a grass frost first thing in 1 or 2 places. However, despite the early June chill in the air, it's going to be a bright start to the day on Tuesday. Plenty of sunshine for southern England, parts of Wales as well in between the showers. Showers also affecting parts of Northern Ireland, especially towards the west, but plenty of bright weather away from those showers. And again, thicker cloud further north, a few showers running into the north of Scotland and the North Sea coast of England. But during the morning, what we'll see is the cloud build more generally across the UK, and showers will again develop fairly widely. You could get a shower just about anywhere, but the most likely areas for frequent showers will be northern, central and eastern England, where those showers will be heavy at times. It's going to feel cool here as well, 12 or 13 Celsius on that North Sea coast, but where we've got mostly dry weather towards the southwest, 17 or 18 Celsius, not feeling too chilly. Into Wednesday morning, again, a cool start to the day. Plenty of bright weather first thing. A few more showers develop across eastern England. Elsewhere, it stays mostly dry as a ridge of high pressure builds in. That leads to a settled end to the day on Wednesday, but it's only ahead of the next batch of rain moving in for Thursday and Friday.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. I'm Tom Harwood. This is State of the Nation at 8:33. Now, the Civil Service Code demands political impartiality from our Whitehall mandarins. However, one Home Office insider has told GB News that staff have been openly relishing the prospect of a Starmer government, attending pro-Palestine rallies and even advocating for violence against Nigel Farage. Well, our US correspondent Stephen Edgington has got hold of this story. And Stephen, this is your story. What exactly have they told you?
Well, Tom, it's not just one Home Office civil servant. Actually, 2 Home Office civil servants got in contact with me to tell GB News that their colleagues have called for violence against Nigel Farage. And I can't specify the type of violence, but it's incredibly serious to the extent I would say it's criminal. But I'm concerned about protecting my sources. It is incredibly extraordinary that Home Office civil servants discuss openly this kind of intimidation. Not only do they talk about violence against Mr. Farage, but also in one case, civil servants were discussing arresting him. They described the Reform Party as an extremist far-right group. Now, many people will say, well, how do we know if this is true? Now, of course, I'm relying on sources in the Home Office that I've known. I've done a lot of reporting over the years on the civil service. I know many, many people within government, within various departments, and I am 100% certain that this happened. And I know that these colleagues in the Home Office said these incredibly controversial, to the point that, as I said earlier, perhaps even criminal comments internally.
Now, Stephen, some people might say that the Home Office employs thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. Not everyone is in a critical role. Some people are in fairly menial roles. Some are not anything to do with policy or indeed anything operational at all. How seriously should we be taking this if it turns out to be low level?
I think we should be taking it seriously. The people that I know in the Home Office work in migration policy and on migration issues. And this is very relevant to the Reform Party, to Nigel Farage. Obviously, they're very sceptical of immigration. And the argument the Reform makes, by the way, is, look, we need to replace much of the Home Office because they are working against the interests of the British people, particularly on this issue of immigration. And I think this story only goes to confirm many people's suspicions that the people who run the Home Office don't believe in the government's priorities, and in some cases are actively trying to frustrate the will of the government and the will, frankly, of the British people when it comes to migration. And that's partly, perhaps, explains why immigration has been so high in recent years.
Stephen, when people today talk about the civil service resisting government policy or use words akin to some sort of deep state, as the United States might say, or in this country, perhaps institutional resistance, they're talked of as if they're sort of cranks or loonies or completely out of the mainstream. And yet, I seem to remember there was a rather popular BBC sitcom in the 1980s that was describing exactly that, the institutional resistance of the civil service. Indeed, we get the phrase Sir Humphrey from the wonderful series. Why do you think it is that it used to be so politically acceptable to talk about civil service resistance to elected government policy, and now it's seen as something that is fringe, that is odd?
Because of politics. And the people who are criticising the civil service now tend to come from more conservative backgrounds, particularly in the United States, where you've got Donald Trump talking about the deep state. And this has been linked with President Trump, and leftists and sort of more mainstream media types. They see anything that President Trump says and they connect it as some kind of conspiracy theory or some sort of outrageous thing to say. I think in the UK, there's no doubt in my mind that there are civil servants, senior and junior and middle, who are trying to frustrate ministers. Having said all that, to explain the dysfunctionality of the Home Office, I don't want to abdicate responsibility from ministers who have in many ways only fueled all of these problems that I've been talking about in terms of immigration and many other policy issues. They don't clamp down in many cases on the civil servants in their department, even with ministers who one would suspect are more hard line on these things, at least openly, people like Suella Braverman. They weren't successful at sort of reining in their department. Now, you could say that that's because that's the way the Home Office is run, but I think there's some really critical kind of criticisms you can make of Suella Braverman and other Tory ministers over the years. So yes, I think this is clearly happening. As I said, look, I've been doing reporting on this for many years now. It's not a conspiracy theory. And this latest example is one of many where civil servants feel open in the office to express their extreme, what I would call far left political beliefs without any fear of being slapped down by their bosses or by ministers, frankly.
Well, Stephen Edgerton, thank you so much for bringing us that story. Some fairly shocking findings there. Must say a Home Office spokesman has said in response, as the public would rightly expect, our day-to-day operations have continued in line with pre-election guidance, and it would be incorrect to suggest otherwise. The Home Office 50,000 staff abide by the Civil Service Code and continue to work on existing government policy and operations in line with published pre-election guidance. Well, there we are then. Now, a recent survey has found that 1 in 5 young people between the ages of 18 and 24 are unlikely to vote in the upcoming election. 20%. Which means it makes for a very interesting development, considering the fact that the Labour Party intends to lower the voting age to 16. Although I can today disclose that I've learnt that senior members of the Labour Party are divided on this policy. I'm told that Rachel Reeves is uneasy about the idea of lowering the voting age. And despite this, Keir Starmer is adamantly in favour of this constitutional change and pushed it through to feature in the manifesto. All will, of course, be revealed on Thursday when that manifesto is released. So, what are the rights and wrongs of this significant change? And will it make any difference to the most apathetic generation? Well, still with me and my panel, former Brexit Party turned Conservative MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Amy, it does seem interesting that this is sort of a move out of the blue, that for a party that is trying to project stability and moderation, they're going to change the franchise.
I don't think it's out of the blue. I think it's being inspired by what happened in Scotland when 16-year-olds were allowed to vote in the referendum. And it's been that way in Scotland for over a year, and it's worked really well. However, it does remain the fact that it's quite unpopular with the public. But I don't know why the public can't just see that 16-year-olds are civically active. They pay tax, a lot of them.
Do they?
Well, some do.
Some don't. Some 12-year-olds pay tax.
Well, that is a good point. But I was thinking about it, and my 16-year-old nephew, I've just been going through his GCSE course, so he's been doing an Inspector Calls, which, if you recall, is a critique of capitalism by a socialist author. He's in a great position to vote.
Well, that's what some people might go. I think I once played Gerald in an Inspector Calls at a school play. But
that's very on brand.
What's your take on
anyone
this?
Wonders.
I think it's yet another just politicalisation of the electorate and trying to swing things. It's essentially a form of gerrymandering.
Oh, come on.
If you look at the 2017 general election, 66% of 18 and 19-year-olds voted Labour, 19% of over 70s voted Labour. There is a very clear incentive for the Labour Party to allow younger voters because they think they will vote Labour.
Is your contention that they wouldn't be doing that if young people were intensely conservative?
I'm absolutely certain Labour would not be doing this if young people were as strongly conservative as it would appear they are
what would be your
towards Labour.
personal
But they should be careful what they wish for, that if you look over to our continental neighbours, actually the youngest voting group tends to vote for the furthest right parties. So this could easily backfire on Labour. But fundamentally, I think that people who are fascinated by politics at 16 and desperate to vote tend to be slightly weird people like me and quite possibly you, Tom.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
But that most 16, 17-year-olds don't have a huge appetite for politics.
And maybe this is why?
Because it gives them a chance to learn what it's all about, to understand it as an adult, for when they are paying taxes, for when they are part of their communities and society, and not as a child.
Amy, would this argument not have made more sense when the school leaving age was officially 16? Now, if you leave school at 16, you have to go into some form of education or training.
Further education or apprenticeship.
Exactly. You're not allowed to enter a full-time job until you're 18.
Of the community. And the only opposition to this idea that I can hear really is, they'd vote Labour. And if that's really the only argument against it, because you're just as likely to have an uninformed 16-year-old as an uninformed 50-year-old.
To be fair,
there are uninformed people everywhere.
Of course there are, but the question is, where do you base the franchise? Do you do it on who's informed or not, which lies the way to take tests before you're allowed to vote? I don't think that's a good idea.
So I'm saying
16. Why not just base it on who is an adult? Because surely the risk here, Amy, is that if it's lowered to 16, why then are 16-year-olds prohibited from drinking? Why are they prohibited from driving? Why are they prohibited from buying cigarettes? Why are they prohibited from watching pornography?
Right. So the thing about this is that a 16-year-old will be less engaged going forward. By the time they get to 18, they'll be even less likely to vote and we'll have less political engagement than we already do.
We had higher political engagement when the voting age was 21.
We have a massive complacency problem and apathy. There's voter apathy to the hilt. And I think that falls in the hands of the Conservatives.
That showed that people were more likely to vote if they had voted when they were young. A states the blinking obvious. Those who are interested in politics when they can first vote remain interested in politics and want to continue voting. That seems very, very obvious, and it makes no difference if you're 18, 16, 14 or 10. If you're interested at that point, you're more likely to carry on voting.
A 16-year-old is very capable of being politically literate if they can take their exams in politics.
I'm sure there are many 14-year-olds who are much more literate in politics than many 65-year-olds. But thank you to my panel. Coming up, the government may have promised to end the practice of banks closing accounts due to holders' political opinions, but Toby Young has evidence that the scandal continues. How so? Don't go anywhere.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
How can we have Britain's Got Talent? A British girl did win. Yes. This weekend.
Christmas, her name is.
Yes, Sydney Christmas.
Sydney Christmas.
She's a singer. I'm guessing she's going to have a Christmas single out.
She's a cruise ship singer and she works in a gym.
First woman to win in 9 years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't watch it anymore.
But some people clearly do. But apparently 5 of the last in the final were not British born or even live here.
Outrageous.
I know. So why call it Britain's Got Talent?
I know.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It sums up as well this difference between the British public and most people on the telly.
Yeah.
Because the judges do not notice this lack of British involvement in, or at least if they do notice it, they're not saying anything about it. But the viewers notice the imbalance, and just 4 of the foreign acts made it through to the final in the end. There was a patriotic protest in London on Saturdays, it was described. There was hundreds of thousands of people there. There were Students Against Tyranny were there. There was Tommy Robinson was there, much maligned, divisive figure. But these people would say, we are feeling the need to walk on the streets of this country because we no longer feel we can assert our British identity.
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference between patriotism and xenophobia. And I think patriotism is great, and people like to feel a sense of identity, they feel a sense of belonging, you know, they understand what their flag is for, and they kind of, British values, which we all adhere to. And then there's xenophobia, which is sort of, we hate anyone who's not British. So I think I think that march that we saw at the weekend was actually quite patriotic. I don't think it was xenophobic at all. I think it was a nice sort of... They all seemed very kind of peaceful. And there wasn't any horrible rhetoric or anything like that. Certainly much less horrible rhetoric than we're used to seeing from the pro-Palestinian marches.
The People's Channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually, it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Tom Harwood, and this is State of the Nation at 8:47. Now, debanking. Remember that? When Nigel Farage had his bank account closed by NatWest, then it turns out thousands of regular folk had similar experiences. Well, the scandal promoted the government to take action, and they promised back in March to change the rules to make it harder for banks to shut down accounts for political reasons. But was all that simply hot air? The rule changes have been lost in a process known as wash-up, the hasty passage or ditching of legislation ahead of the dissolution of Parliament before an election. Well, Toby Young is here, and he says that the government is still failing us over debanking. Toby, you have campaigned hard on this. This is an issue that seems to have just got lost in the melee.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the casualties of the snap election. The Free Speech Union, the organisation I run, got debanked back in 2022. We fought back and managed to get PayPal to restore our account, but we thought, well, this is obviously not just happening to us. So we then embarked on a long campaign to persuade the Treasury to change the payment services regulations to make it more difficult for banks and payment processors like PayPal to debank individuals, companies, organisations for political reasons. And we actually made some headway. And then when Nigel's issue blew up and it turned out he'd been debanked by Coots, the government thought, well, we'll have to act. And so they agreed to change these regulations to make debanking not impossible, but a bit more difficult. The Treasury Minister that we were dealing with and we developed a good relationship with, he was reshuffled last year. But he said, at the time I was reshuffled, it was all ready to go. And then the Treasury published a draft version of the statutory instrument.
This secondary legislation, Henry VIII powers, sometimes known as.
secondary legislation that would have enabled the government to make these changes to the payment services regulations. It was all agreed, the draft had been written, and it was going to be laid.
These things are just nodded through Parliament usually.
Yeah, there's very little, there's no debate, there's no opportunity to amend them, so it was a done deal. But they just didn't have time to lay the statutory instrument before the dissolution of Parliament. So it's fallen by the wayside. I mean, I don't think it was deliberate malfeasance by the government. I think it was just one of many things they were genuinely planning to do that got lost in the wash-up, as you say.
Now, of course, you and the Free Speech Union and many campaigners built relationships with the Conservative ministers who were drawing up this legislation ready to go. Obviously, if we're to believe the polls, unless there is the most monumental polling error unseen before in the history of Western democracy, there will be a Labour government in 3 weeks' time. Have you made inroads with likely Treasury ministers, with Rachel Reeves' team? How optimistic are you about this going forward?
Not terribly optimistic. We started a petition at the Free Speech Union to try and urge all the political parties to include a commitment to seeing this through in their manifestos. And it's not a partisan issue. Anyone can be debanked. It isn't just people on the right that it affects. Some far left groups have been debanked as well. It affects Muslims. The Muslim charities often find themselves debanked. Finsbury Park Mosque got into difficulty with its banking facilities. My hope is that the best way of persuading the Labour Party to embrace this policy and see through these changes, and they didn't oppose them in Parliament. There was cross-party consensus that this needed to happen. We don't want a Chinese-style social credit system in our country.
In some ways, it's perhaps more aligned with the Labour Party's values. After all, you're telling businesses that they can't operate their business in the way that they would choose.
Yes, the reason I hold out a smidgen of hope is that because the Labour Party is terrified of losing votes to Muslim candidates in various constituencies where the Muslim vote, this new organisation, is fielding candidates against the Labour candidate and has made this list of 14 demands it wants the Labour Party to meet before it'll withdraw these candidates. Well, it obviously can't meet all 14 of these demands, but if they added a 15th, see through these amendments to the payment services regulations to make it more difficult for us, amongst others, to be debanked, then that might enable the Labour Party to claw back some of these votes it might lose to Muslims who are concerned about this issue as well as many other issues.
Amendments to the payment regulations. It doesn't sound like the most populist charge in the world, but somehow it has become a large political issue.
I think with Muslims, they're aware of this, and they do care about it. And if they can be persuaded to add it to their list of things they want the Labour Party to prioritise when they get into office, I mean, it wouldn't be that big a price. It's not like, breaking off military relations with Israel. It wouldn't be that big a price for Keir Starmer to pay.
It's something that was going to happen anyway.
It was something that was going to happen anyway, and the Labour Party hadn't opposed. But if people want to sign our Free Speech Union petition, if they search for change.org and debanking, they'll find it. And the more signatures we can get, the more pressure we can put on the Labour Party and the other parties to actually see this through, whatever the outcome of the election.
Brilliant stuff. Well, Toby Young, thank you so much for joining us and talking through that issue. The fight goes on for some, although for others, what an onerous regulation being placed on businesses. Perhaps it's right up the Labour Party's street. Well, thank you, Toby. Up next is Ben Leo, in for Patrick Christie's. Ben, what's coming up?
Hello, Tom. Cracking show. Look, we've just been watching Rishi Sunak's interview on BBC Panorama with Nick Robinson. We've got all the clips, some very bizarre goings-on, including talks of roast dinners and quinoa salads. Kelvin Mackenzie's here as well, and also extraordinary footage of the IDF raid in Gaza where they rescued 4 hostages. Do not miss it. See you in a tick.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'm looking forward to that footage. Ben Leo, thank you so much for all of that. Now it just remains for me to say that there is the weather to come up, and I've been told at the end of each of these programmes, I'm contractually obliged almost, to say that in Somerset the weather is, of course, very, very sunny. But, of course, I can't give any guarantees for the weather anywhere else. Up next, it's Ben Leo in for Patrick Christie's.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Still some showers around during the next 24 hours, but also a few clear spells, and under starry skies tonight, temperatures will fall. It's going to be a chilly one for June. We've got this northerly airflow, and within those northerly winds, we've still got some showers, especially for the north and the east coast. One or two inland elsewhere, but many of the inland showers will ease overnight, leading to plenty of clear spells, especially in the south and the west, where we've got clear spells, temperatures dipping to 7 or 8 Celsius generally, but a little lower than that in some sheltered spots, and as a result, the potential for a grass frost first thing in 1 or 2 places. However, despite the early June chill in the air, it's going to be a bright start to the day.